Welcome, Emily.
Hello.
Yeah, it's the second time we've had a guest on the Maginative podcast. The first time we've had such a wonderful human being that I've worked with directly with, and somebody who I've had like that personal connection to where I've seen your work in action. And this is going to be one of those conversations where we're going to keep on bumping between what we've seen in the past and what we're going to see in the future. And even if there's a connection between that. But you haven't met Chris yet. And so he's got a whole bunch of questions about the work that you've been doing that are completely brand new. And I have no idea what he's going to ask you. So why don't we start? You have done something, and this is kind of straight into the deep end. You've done something which I've always admired about you, and that is you are currently between things, like formally working for companies. And of course, that doesn't keep you down. You've gone out and built something immediately called the Shape of AI. And the Shape of AI is this amalgamation of all your experience design, UI design, product design, and some of the things that you were already touching on with AI in your previous job, but now kind of leaning into really heavily. Tell us why. Why does this have to happen? Why are we having this conversation right now?
So, as I started to use more and more of these products that are bringing in these generative AI, I started to see consistent usability problems, and I
Mm,
couldn't put my finger on them. Some of them are more what we would traditionally think about usability within the interface. Why is this button here? Why does this text say this? But what's distinct about these products and these features is that the way we interact with information has fundamentally changed. We're no
mhm.
longer guiding people through a set of actions and a set of information to be able to perform some task. They're having to now interact with the AI, get results back, figure out if those results are accurate, tune
Mm,
what they're asking it to produce. And if our interfaces and patterns, interactions aren't supporting that, we're throwing people into the water and asking them to swim, and I think that's a very dangerous presumption for us to make as designers, as product people, but also in an emerging space where we need the public to trust this technology, or else we're going to be starting on our back heels in order to bring the products to them that we think can really benefit their life. And so that was sort of the impetus behind it, and I did have some free time and my brain was whirling as I was looking through all of these products. And so, really the reason why that whole project exists is because I needed to get out of my own head and out,
mm.
just throw my knowledge into the common sphere and say, what do you think about this? What am I missing? And where do we need to go with this?
So, what exactly is the shape of AI? Because it seems like it's a directory of resources, but it's more than that, right?
I hope it's more than that. It started out as this directory of patterns. What are the patterns that we're seeing emerge? And also maybe some that could be there to solve some of the problems that are
Mm,
already in place.
mhm,
And the way that I've structured it is by mapping it to what I'm seeing as this journey of interaction that's becoming more common in these products, which is that sense and respond flow. So
mhm,
I need to identify, where is AI? When am I interacting with AI? What is this
mm,
thing? And then I have to figure out, how do I use it? How do I ask it to give me something in return that's different depending on how often you've been using it? What is the form that that answer takes across
mhm,
different ways that it's implemented? How do I know if that's accurate? How do I know what I can do next? How do I know how to shape this thing? And then finally, how do I build trust with this technology, to keep me engaged and to give me more and more confidence
mm.
as I use it continuously? So that's the state that it's in today. But the more I played with it, the more I realized this metaphor of the shape of this thing expands beyond patterns. How we operate, how we work, how our skills evolve are all going to affect how we build, the patterns we use, how we're thinking about this problem, how innovative we are, how fast we can move. And so I'm starting to expand my lens to, how do we evaluate our products? What do our teams look like? And so on.
So, I have a thesis, and tell me if you disagree with this, but it seems like AI is pushing us closer to a conversation and maybe further away from a one way dialogue. And that conversation obviously has to feel, as a human being, like you're being heard, you're being understood, you're being welcomed to this conversation. Otherwise, the AI itself may be both misunderstood or misused, not in a nefarious way, but just in an obviously tactical way. Like, this thing is not doing what I expected it to do. And now I'm getting frustrated because I'm the human, and
Mm.
that back and forth is not elevated to a true conversation, two-way conversation, but rather it's just deteriorating into what we've always seen, as you pointed out earlier, which is just this one way push, 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 push.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of framing it. And obviously, conversation can mean something more literal or something more implied, depending on the implementation. But even in like a AI-driven analytics platform, you're asking it. I was in Google Analytics today. They have this AI tool where you can ask it to summarize the data.
Mm,
So I'm saying, tell me about where people are visiting from in the last week, and I expect a few things as a user. I expect to get an answer that's consistent with what I would get if I found it myself.
mm-hmm,
I expect it to be contained to my inquiry. So if it came back with, here's what's happened in the last month, that would be different than what I asked it to do.
mm-hmm,
And then I expect to be able to do something else. Don't just give me an answer, let me interact with this, maybe using the
mm-hmm,
traditional interface or maybe asking you to go deeper. And I liken it to how we talk. Because when we're sitting across a table from each other, you're not worried about how many speech bubbles it takes, to get to some answer. We're no longer tracking clicks. We're both getting to know how the other is communicating.
mm-hmm,
And if I'm trying to get some information out of you, I'm going to say something. I'm going to see how you're going to respond. I'll adjust my tactic. I'll get a different answer. I'll be more specific. And so I think that's a really useful metaphor for how we are interacting with the computer and the data in this new space.
and I've been reading a book called Super Communicators by a guy called Charles Duhigg. Emily, you strike me as the person he was trying to write about in this book. Um, but one of the things that he points out is that whenever there's a good conversation going on, it's because you're matching. You're matching both the
Mm.
practicality of the conversation. In other words, what is actually going on here? What kind of exchange of information is happening? There's also an exchange of emotion. Well, what is the emotional level? Are we
Mm.
matched there? And then the
Mm.
final one is, what is the social match? Are we playing status games? Are we trying to impress each other? Are we fitting in? Are we belonging? And it seems to me that part of your pattern work is starting to suggest this idea that this thing that we call artificial intelligence really starts to feel less like artificial intelligence when we are able to see the human being matched within that conversation.
I think I agree with you. I think we get into a dangerous realm when we start to project an anthropomorphic
Mm,
quality onto the AI. So, as long as we're being intentional about using the metaphor to our advantage, to understand what might be happening, to make sense of what confuses us, and to teach
mhm,
other people, then I fundamentally subscribe to that. I think the way that you've put that is really excellent. It is a step beyond just seeing it as a computer program or seeing it as something magic. It's something in between. And we need
mm.
to find the words and the metaphors and the mental structures to work with this unknown thing.
That's fascinating, Emily. I was spending some time reading the website. I love the content that you have put together on there. I love the fact that you started by saying we have built up so much experience and history in terms of good design patterns that we know works, and we definitely don't want to throw those out the water now with a new technology like AI. So I want to start there. I want to talk a little bit about just your personal experience over the last 2 years. Once your first experience with AI, what that was like, and how that evolved as you use different tools. I want you to be as specific as you can about the tools that maybe enchanted you, that surprised you, that disappointed you. But I'd love to hear about what really triggered this need to dive deeper into the design patterns and the design language.
So I am very fortunate that I was working at a company that was putting AI at the center of its strategy. And
Mm.
there are a few specific people there that really sort of shaped mostly my curiosity around how we start to work with this. So there's Aaron White was the CTO, another great person to interview. And Aaron was starting to think about we were building this workflows tool. We were building this SaaS platform, the SaaS platform that helped you manage SaaS, actually, very meta. And you were still having to go deep into the data. So we had all this data. We had the largest data set of SaaS platforms and how people are using and how it's pricing, and then relying on the user to go and find the answer and build the workflow to get the answer. And so he started to think about, well, what if we treated AI as a person inside of our company? What if we treated it like an agent? And that was probably a year and a half or 2 years ago. And that's really where my brain went ping and into this metaphoric space where, of course, they're not a person on our team. But if we started to think about AI as maybe one of two personalities, either a trusted peer advisor, maybe a senior person on your team, maybe a chief of staff where you can say, I need you to go do this task. I trust you to do it. Go do it. Come back and tell me when you've done it. Or I could give it something more broad. I'm trying to figure this out. Go tell me what you find and come back and bring me that strategy or bring me that overview so that I can assess it. And then the other side of it is maybe someone less experienced on your team. You're giving a task. It might even be a sort of rote task, but you're saying, I need this off my plate. I need to delegate this. Please go do this. So that's sort of one aspect of it, is this metaphor, this idea of apps are people too. And then I had a chance to work very closely. Zach Sheffer was the head of data. And then we had an engineer named Rafal, who was our AI programmer. And because of the nature of this company, I was working very closely with them one-on-one. And so as we were starting to play around with how AI could enter into our product, we were having open conversations on a daily basis, learning out in the open and seeing how other people were thinking about it and learning. Amazing. It was really amazing. It really was. I'll just kind of sidebar to say this company has this culture that Aaron and some engineers that were on his team brought to the table, called rubber ducking, which is this idea that if you're stuck on a problem, you put a rubber duck on your desk and you talk through it to the duck and get it out of your head. And so every single person in product design and engineering had a rubber duck channel, which was essentially a microblog, and you could write your thoughts and see other people's and reblog in. And so a lot of my thinking out in the open, that ability to get over that hump, I think comes from that. But anyway, so that was sort of the impetus of curiosity. And then I took a course from Mia Bloom, who runs Design with AI. She used to run the Go Within conference. She's wonderful. Yeah. And she is a creative director. And so she's thinking about, how do we use Midjourney to think about ourselves as creative directors of the machine? So another similar parallel, somebody who's thinking about, we're not treating this as a friend. We're not treating this as an advisor. We're treating it as an assistant, as a peer, as somebody on your team that you can work with. And that started to pump all these thoughts into my brain on the product design side of, how do we treat tokens, and start to think about this in an atomic way. And I want to come back and talk to you about that, Richard, a little bit more, because I know you're also thinking about design systems more broadly. But anyway, to sort of round this out, Zach and I peeled off and we said, what if we started just experimenting with this? We're not exactly sure yet what precise form this technology should take in our product. There are some places it made sense, like summarizing long workflows and long sets of comments. But he and I just started doing one experiment a week where we would just conceptualize something. So we conceptualized everything from an AI-driven game that could help customers get used to the skills of procurement and kind of guide them through a transformation path, all the way to, what if we could take your contract, export the data behind it, and give you a score back on your contract. And then one of these experiments that ended up going all the way through to fruition was this bids platform, which just launched a couple weeks ago. The notion is, you want to buy software, someone else is selling. How do we connect you more easily and allowed you to bid for each other's business? And the AI layer was simply, how do we make this as easy as possible? You describe what you want, and then we can help you paint a picture of, this is what better looks like for me. You're focused on getting to that bid as fast as possible. So here AI was introduced as a way of decreasing the workload for somebody to perform a critical task that opened up new business value. And so that's a lot of the story. In addition to just sort of behind the scenes, I've been consulting with a few other companies, thinking about, how do we use summarization, AI summarization, to get to the atomic elements of a book? So I don't have
Mm.
to wait for somebody to read a book like super communicators for me to be able to get to the point that we could have a conversation about it. And a few other examples similar to that.
Wow.
Okay, my turn. Emily, there's two things about you that I know are really important, key in your work, right from the days when you were formally involved in education at the SAS level, but now also in your day-to-day work, has also, like, every point of your work has been bringing people along with you. You are never satisfied being the leader, but also bringing people with you and making sure everybody's up to speed. Probably one of my earliest memories of you is you doing a talk called Words Matter, which was a talk specifically around design systems and the kind of adjacencies of that. But the idea around this talk was that the way that we organize our communication, the way we look at governance, the way that we align our teams, the commonalities that we're seeking out, that work is the work.
Mm,
Yes, we do need tokens, we need components, we need pieces of the puzzle to build these things that ultimately become products. But the work is the people. How are we going to take that ideal, which I'm sure you haven't lost? That's probably like still key in your thinking. How is that part of the work going forward? Because it's great. Chris and I talk about new technologies, new chips, new models. We talk about this a lot, but it's kind of a distraction from the real work, which is how do we bring everybody along and make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind,
Mhm.
giving opportunities. This can quickly become another um, divisive part of our already divisive world, right? It can
mm.
become like jargon, it can become like racism, it can separate people. How do
Mhm.
we make sure we bring everybody along?
Well, I think maybe we should accept that there's some degree to which that is naturally going to happen, and then agree to look past the debate. Because, I mean, there are real concerns with this technology, particularly in the generative space and how we think about intellectual property. And I don't think we should graze past those conversations. But what I see happening right now is the greatest acceleration in skills that we have had probably in 40 years, where people are being forced just by the very nature of the job market to get to the edges of their comfort zone and then move beyond them, which is
Mm-hmm.
resulting in people looking for new ways to earn those skills, to gain those skills. I imagine we're going to see a growth in independent and open source projects. We're seeing people think about how to remap their existing skills onto these new problems and creatively form a mental model that they're then projecting outwards of here's what I look like as an
Mm-hmm.
AI conversational designer or an AI data designer or an AI, UX researcher. And so maybe that's one part of it is just recognizing that we're all in this together. I have a draft of a blog post I'm working on right now calling We All Work for Startups Now. Because it doesn't matter if you're at Microsoft or if you're independent, we're all trying to figure out what's behind the fog bank.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us, might have a little bit more clarity than others, but we're all in it together. So that's one piece of it is just sort of that community recognition. I think another aspect is that different people are going to bring different things to the table. For example, I have this skill set of being able to take complicated concepts and put them into pretty simple terms. But there's a lot I don't understand about the complicated topics. And so I need to have access to engineers and to data scientists and to academics who are doing the work. And I'm relying on them to focus on bringing that to the table. And other people are saying, how do we rebuild our teams? And that's not what I'm
Mm-hmm.
focused on. And so I'm relying on them. And so just sharing out loud, sharing your work, assume that somebody is there to listen or at least to respond and help you craft your thoughts. I think being able to speak in the open, learn in the open is going to be really important. It's unfortunate that so many of our social platforms are so algorithmic and have become just
Yeah.
these hype
Yeah.
machines. I've been in my own sort of revolutionary way. I laugh as I say that. I've started treating LinkedIn as a microblog. I'm not there to use it to necessarily sell products or
Yep.
sell myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to show up as authentically as possible and just say, this is what I'm learning, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. And I hope more people do that as well. Um, and by doing it, I can make it more comfortable for others to do it, which I think is helpful. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting couple of years, but I remember back in around 2009, 2010, as this space of design, product design was really starting to open up. We had the iPhone was hitting mass adoption. Google was starting to push and prod a little bit on that, and it was beginning stages of this design systems thing. There was just such a strong community of people willing to learn and think together. We had blogs, we had people
Yeah.
Yeah.
communicating
Yeah.
across them. I hope we see that now. I
Yeah.
think we need that. I hope it happens.
I
I
think
think
we're
it's happening.
starting to see it. Yeah. I
Yeah,
definitely
we're
think. Go ahead,
we're
Richard.
definitely seeing it. Every time we throw an event, we get oversubscribed. Way more people show up than we anticipated, and nobody wants to go home. We're like, "Hey,
Yeah.
listen, it's 7 o'clock. You've got families to feed," and they're like, "No, this is amazing. We want to be together." So I think you're right. There's maybe a combination of that and the COVID years and everything. We're
Mm.
all participating in this epidemic of loneliness. But for sure, I like this idea of we're all startups again. Naval Ravikant had this idea that we are all ultimately 1099s, and that's the future. You know, maybe
Yeah.
it is, maybe it's not, but the idea that we can all have individual sovereignty and bring that to the conversation, there's something quite wonderful about that.
Yeah, I think it is quite beautiful. It's scary. It's scary to a lot of people. I've spent quite a bit of time in my career working in sort of the organizational transformation ed tech space. And um, being able to lattice your career and recognizing that doing something different, maybe moving
Mm,
from people management to IC work, maybe learning a new skill, being the neophyte in the room is
mhm.
actually one of the most mature things we can do as we advance in our career. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We should see it as a strength. And by constantly remixing our skills in new and different ways, we remain in command of our careers first and
Yeah.
foremost. We're seeing, that's a whole another common conversation as well. But it gives us the ability to remix and remap in creative ways. And I think there's a creativity to skill development at play.
It's poetry in motion listening to you think and talk about design. And I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about design broadly because I think so many people felt threatened initially when they saw AI on the scene. So many designers felt like, oh, AI is here, there goes my job. Right. And I just love listening to you because you're showing that designers have a place more than ever before now in the age of AI, not just designing interfaces, but designing the space for which we think about AI and we build this future technology. So talk to me about if I'm a designer today, if I'm in design school, or if I'm thinking of going into design as a career, where do you see the space? What are the opportunities that you're most excited about? And what advice would
Mm.
you give to a budding designer?
So we've gone through multiple re envisionings of what it is to do design, and particularly design in this technology space. It's happened more than once. It happened with the advent of the GUI in the 80s. I mean, prior to that, there were designers, and they were largely designing the algorithms or the processes behind the scenes and not the interface itself with how people interacted with information. And so suddenly, your average consumer could buy an Apple II and then interact with this stuff, which is amazing. And then we had the growth of the internet, and now you're not just interacting with the stuff that your company is serving you from their servers in the basement, but you're interacting with stuff from other people too. And so
Mhm.
you're starting to see a remixing of ideas. How do we think about that? How do we design for that growth? And so we had the beginning of platforms, ebags.com like is a perfect example. Then we move into the world of personal devices. And now I'm not just designing for people interacting with information and other people's information, but now it's something I'm doing at all times. I'm doing it in different contexts. I have more access, more times, more
Mhm.
things I want to do, more jobs to be done. And now we're in this world where I'm not just interacting with information, other people's information in more contexts, but I'm doing it in seamless ways that just fit into my day-to-day life. I can talk to my devices. I can logic to my devices. I don't have to stop what I'm doing and go to an interface and log in and then take all these tasks to get to the database I need. I can say, hey, what's going on with that sale? And are we going to be able to make our quota? And it can just give it to me. And so I think what's happening is that a lot of designers have been trained over the last 8 to 10 years in this idea that screens and devices, it's the future. And of course, we've had a growth of all these boot camps as all these people have hit the industry. And so it's scary because the medium has changed, the material is
Mhm.
changing, but
Hmm.
the interaction itself at its core is not. And so I would say, first and foremost, like, get comfortable with the fact that change has happened before, and every single change has made our discipline, our industry stronger,
Hmm.
smarter, and more ingrained in the larger processes. The second thing is fundamentals matter. And I'm seeing a lot of companies forget that if you go through their products. And fundamentals now matter in both the interface itself, the literal interface of how I'm interacting with the product, but also what's happening within that conversation with the data within the product. What am I getting back? How do I think about that? What are the heuristics of that conversation with AI is another thing I've been starting to play with. There's some really interesting academic work asking that question. Um, and then the third thing I'd say is that our jobs will change. We will need to get comfortable with being maybe not technical people, but technologists, and to say, how could we apply this in new and different ways in people's lives in a way that generates value? You know what? That's product strategy. We have to say, what are the technical constraints within this design that I need to consider so that I'm not just designing the perfect experience, I'm designing the experience that works, that I can introduce tomorrow and that I can evolve and grow with the user. That's thinking like an engineer. And all of this whole, the business value of design and get a seat at the table nonsense, we've just been talking and talking and trying to cargo cult our way to impact. Now we're actually seeing the industry finally hitting the moment that it's been asking for. We
Yeah.
get to have that seat at the table, because if we don't, these products will fail.
Yep.
People can build a competitor so fast. You have to nail the experience. You have to nail the fundamentals.
Love that. Love that.
Hallelujah. Okay. Another thing you are interested in is you're a parent. We all are parents actually on this call. God help us. And we're raising children not only in an age of technology, social media. I thought that was going to be the biggest challenge of this particular generation. I've got older kids. I've got a soon to be 8-year old, and Chris has even got some really little ones.
Yeah.
And we probably thought maybe social media was the biggest hurdle that we had to face.
Hmm.
AI is a whole different story. The things
Mm.
that I'm observing my 8-year old do is, although there are screens in his life, he speaks to Alexa as if she's another member of the family, and in a native way that feels still somewhat clunky for me. Right, Alexa, set timer for blah blah blah. She's
Good
gonna.
morning, Richard.
She's already
Time for holiday.
Alexa off. Um, but he speaks to her as if she's a member of the family. He asks her questions all the time. He makes assumptions about the fact that facts are not things that you need to categorize in your head, but rather that they live in this
Mm.
external repository somewhere, and they're always available. There's, whether it's your device or um, a screen that's going to get you there. But now he's also starting to recognize that AI is part of that story as well. And there's a conversation to be had with this virtual thing. We're still anthropomorphizing it in an odd way, in a clunky way. He's doing it in a way that's making the assumption that this is actually an extension of human experiences. So I know you recently blogged about this or posted about this. Let's talk a little bit about the generation that's coming up. Let's talk about the children that will find this stuff completely embedded in their life, whether
Hmm.
they like it or not.
Mm. It's terrifying. It's exciting. um, I feel conflicted.
Yeah,
I
as we
guess.
should, as we should.
Oh gosh, yeah. So the blog post, the little microblog thing you're alerting to, is I had sat down with Peter, who's going to be 9 in April, and watched him interact with ChatGPT and Claude a little bit as well, and then also with Google. If you turn on in the Labs function, they have this generative search function that you can play with, and I wanted to just see how he interacted with them and what he thought about them. And some things certainly stood out. Like, number one, the amount of garbage on the internet is a real problem. It's I don't know what the solution is there either. I'm really worried about that, because he had asked, "Why are my friends mean to me?" And the first response came from Quora, and it told him, of the things that it listed, it said his friends might have a personality disorder was one of the top. I
Oh,
mean, what a
that's a big
silly
jump.
thing. It's a
Wow.
Yeah.
huge jump. And it's very dangerous, especially when I think about more like teenagers and the
Hmm.
garbage
Right.
on the internet about body image and weight and depression and
Hmm.
all the kids, self-identifying as all sorts of various, um, things on TikTok. So anyway, that's one that I don't know the solution other than regulation and uh, again, treating it as a heuristic, treating it as usability, that the information at least is traceable
Hmm.
that's informing the AI. As a parent, at least I could go and say, what is the response you're drawing from? Another one is just sort of in general, he trusts the computer. And that's what you're saying, Richard. He trusts it.
Mm.
He doesn't think to say, how do you know that that's true? Which is
Mm.
funny because he's always second guessing what I have to say to him.
Right.
and and I mean, it tells us again that like critical thought is such an important skill. Something that I've been doing, and I'm in the process of betaing a course that a couple of my friends and their kids are going through. I'm using image generators to teach kids about the traceability of information in these
Mm-hmm.
systems. And so if you create an image in Midjourney and then you use the describe function, are those the words you would have used to describe that image? What surprised you? What tokens are there that you didn't put in? And what does that tell us about what the machine is doing? And so
Right.
I can't teach my kids regression analysis across large data sets, but I can teach them that type of critical curiosity. And I'm hoping that tools like that, courses like that, and just sort of education in general, and again, the ease of accessing those features is
Yeah.
something that will help. Um, but I think there's also a beauty to it too. I mean, these kids are growing up in a world where information really is at their fingertips, and how do we help that become something that empowers them? But honestly, I guess the other side of it is I remember being a kid and going to the Encyclopedia Britannica online, or whatever, back when it was still an application on your
Exactly.
Windows computer, and you quote it in some paper. The first time you quote Wikipedia as an authoritative source, and your teacher's like, what are you talking about? So I don't
Yeah.
know that it's all that different. It's just a little
No.
bit more in your face right
Well,
now.
I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid era, and when I got to university, we studied the textbooks that had been written by the architects of apartheid.
Mm,
So the books that we were looking to as authorities, encyclopedias, textbooks, had been crafted by the very people that wanted to disseminate their propaganda. And I don't
Yeah.
know if that's changed at all. I don't think that's any different. The only thing that I've found helps with my kids is explaining to them how the internet works and why they see this thing and that thing and how advertising models work. And when they're looking at something, they're actually interacting with an advertiser,
mm,
and that the origin of that information shouldn't be. I mean, we have this really. I have a 21-year-old, and he and his girlfriend still live here at home. And obviously, with a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East right now, there's this conversation about like what is actually happening, what are we seeing, and they were, even as 21-year-olds, they were surprised to hear that the algorithm is going to feed them a certain narrow perspective based on what they've looked at in the past.
mm,
And so it's important to have this conversation. Again, I think it's the same conversation our parents probably had with us about watching too much television or reading the wrong books or whatever it is that we were doing, um, back when the dinosaurs were still roaming the planet. I think it's really mostly about the questions and the curiosity that we're instilling into them, rather than pointing at an object and saying that thing is bad, the internet's bad, AI is bad. I don't think that's
yeah.
helpful at all, because anytime my parents said don't do that, that's exactly what I went and did.
Well, I think we should be mindful and optimistic about what's coming because right now, even in the most advanced generative AI interface, you're still working with a narrow AI model. It
Yeah.
has a limited data set, it only knows information up to a certain point, and most critically, it doesn't know how to tell you how it got to some result. We
Right.
kind of have that with the describe function in Midjourney, Google search and Perplexity that can kind of show you the root sources they're using, but if I go to ChatGPT and I say, "Tell me your opinion about insert controversial topic here," and it gives me an answer, and I say, "How did you arrive at that answer?" It can give me some caveated, "Well, I'm a piece of technology and I don't really have an opinion," but it doesn't say,
Yeah.
"This is how I arrived at my expectation that this is the most probable answer to the
Right.
question you asked. That will change. Right now, we have research teams that are working on how do we expand the ability for these tools to work backwards and to, again, it's not AGI, it's just sort of advancing the logical parameters of the models. But I think coming back to what we as designers can be thinking, and product people and engineers can be thinking about, is if we can't, if we don't have machines today that can tell you how it arrived at an answer, how can we make it as seamless as possible to let you sculpt the answer you're looking for and then go
Mm,
deeper? Go
mm,
deeper to prompt. I think about, for example, if you were in Claude or Perplexity and you get some answer of what is happening in the Middle East, today I'd have to do a lot of work to go and look and find other sources, or what is the opinion of some political party or whatever. Well, now versus an algorithm which is just feeding me noise based off of what some machine and the incentives of some business want me to do, I have the ability to push back. And I think that is the most critical thing about this moment we're in as users. We
Mm.
have the ability to push back and say, no, that's not where I want to go. That's not what I am looking for. Or tell me more. It could be dangerous as well. It could also exacerbate personal bubbles. But for those who want the critical skills and the information at their fingertips, we now have that much more easily available.
I think it's a fascinating time to be alive. It's a fascinating place to be in terms of the where we are on the curve of AI. And I like to think of language models as really being just focused on language. And with language, it brings communication, it brings storytelling, it brings this opportunity to, as you say, maybe literacy, right? Focusing on just literacy. And I have this blog article I'm working on called Literacy is All You Need. Imaginative literacy is something we're passionate about because, to your point, educating people as to how to use these tools and this technology appropriately will be super important. Let's switch gears a little bit, Emily, and talk about devices because we're seeing the advent of AI first devices like the Rabbit and the Humane AI Pin. We're starting to see AI on our smartphones coming later this year. As a designer, as a design leader, as a design thinker, how do you think about these next generation devices? Are there any that have piqued your interest that you think
Hmm.
just missed the mark? What are you thinking about AI first devices?
I guess similar to the last question, I'm very conflicted because you can see the power. Multimodal generative AI is would be a massive leap forward, both in terms of the consumer benefits, just like the individual benefits, but also in areas like healthcare, accessibility, and just opening up our senses to things that the physical world around us often has access to, certain signals, certain information that
Mm.
we don't. Why is it that birds will flee an area before an earthquake hits? How does
Yeah.
a bird know that? Are there signals that these computers can help us tap into that we don't have access to today?
Mm.
I also think about people who are differently abled, where if one sense is naturally not as strong for them, their other senses amplify. Could we expand that to more people, or could we use that to expand, um, empathy, access to information, and so on? So I think there's a lot of things to be very excited about. I'm actually, I'm not on the sort of hang a token around your neck and let it record your conversations. I think I'm not quite to the point of comfort with that. But spectacles, as long as there's some sort of affordance of what is happening, in-ear devices, the ability of, is it the Rabbit that can kind of like create an interface on your arm? So again, like interacting with data without having to have. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to carry our phones around with us, staring at them all the time, and we can lift our head
Oh,
up?
I have to tell you, the number of flip phone sales have gone through the roof. I think they went up like 200% this last year.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I live in a place where we have a lot of national parks, and I've been for years thinking about what if I could go to the park and instead of staring at my phone to get some information about some art, I'm literally having access to the ability to see. Show me these geological layers. Oh my gosh, this is from the time of the Triassic era. Wow, I can actually see what the plant
Mm.
life looked like around me in that time. The immersiveness of education is just so exciting. It's also terrifying. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of the trust issue. I'm terrified about, the ways it can be used by abusers, the ways that it can be used by policing, the ways that it can be used um, to sow distrust instead of empowering people. And I think that we need, certainly the United States is behind much of the rest of the world in the way we're regulating. Regulation isn't everything, it has flaws, but just the way we are training our regulators to understand this.
Yeah.
But I think we also need first principles. We need to go back to our ISO principles. We need to go back to our design schools. We need to go back to our big players like Microsoft and now OpenAI, and what are the principles in which they are operating under, and
Mm.
making them transparent and making them
Mm.
human-centered, and human-centered in a way that doesn't just focus the individual, but the community and the people around them. I think we should be very loud and aggressive in calling for that.
I imagine that I can benefit from AI devices when I think about my aging parents
Mm.
and wonder whether that can help me be the eyes and ears that I can't be when, um, you know, now weakened parent is walking around their own apartment or something like that.
Mm,
Takes the whole help, I've fallen down and I can't get up to another level. Um,
absolutely.
Emily, let's talk a little bit about the application of stuff. You actually worked in an organization where AI was being used to help people make better choices about the products that they were going to use. We're starting to see AI go from being this kind of curiosity or maybe of novelty. Certainly, what Chris and I have been covering in the news of the last year, it's gone from, wow, there's that cool distant glow on the horizon to, hey, you can actually buy this thing or use this thing or make this choice based on this. The latest prediction was 95% of marketing positions will
Mm,
either be replaced entirely or will be augmented by AI. That's a crazy number. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew it was going to be big. 95 seems like, you know, a number I can't even get my head around. But where are we going to see the specific applications in design? What
mm,
will a designer do? Because I remember you and I worked with John at Envision, John Dabrowski. He was a very vocal design leader, and he used to say designers shouldn't be pushing pixels. They should just not be in Figma. They should not be making stuff. They should be thinking about how to make stuff, and then they should have things to help them do that better so that they can be more efficient. What are we
mm.
actually going to see? Are we going to see design being affected in the same way that marketing is from a practical level?
So the another little metaphor I have in my head. I need to touch grass more often, I guess. But instead of thinking about this as it will replace these jobs, I think a better term is it's going to displace them. If you drop an ice cube in a glass of water, maybe some
Mm.
water splashes out, but the water's still there,
Mm.
and it's just in a different place. It's playing a different role. It's interacting with its water molecules, its peers in different ways. So I think if we start with an abundance mindset, maybe it allows us to not just get completely pummeled by the doom
Mhm.
cycle,
Yeah.
which I have had days where I am maybe not as optimistic. But within design, um, there's a couple things that really stand out. The first is, I think it was in 2019 when John Maida's uh, design and tech report introduced the idea of three tracks of design. And I'm not going to exactly remember the names, but essentially there's classical design, there's generative design, and then I think maybe there was like operational design. So classical design is is the emotional quality. We're going to need that. We're going to need that more than ever. How do we differentiate the human experience from the machine generated experience? There's some interesting products looking at how we can use brand systems and brand expression, and then use the computer to do the nuts and bolts work of how do we lay this out on the page and generate some Instagram posts. But the
Yeah.
voice and tone, the character, training the machine, I am, even when we get to whatever it is we're going to call AGI, we're a long way off from Rosie the robot and in the Jetsons. And even Rosie needed to be directed by her humans,
Yeah.
And I think we always need to be thinking as designers about how do we craft the emotional connection, the beauty, the beautiful things that make us distinct. Then
Mhm.
in this operational world, um, yeah, I think we're probably going to see things like design systems designers fade from the how much it dominates the conversation, but it doesn't go away. It comes back to intent. What is the intent that we're trying to do through this information, through
Mhm.
these modules? So I was mentioning, Richard, I want to come back to design systems, so I'll just touch on this briefly. Today we create some molecule, we create, some set of things, some form element maybe, and we describe it in our description. We might even
Mm.
say where it goes in the product. But now we have to say, what happens when someone interacts with this? What is the
Yes.
description of what's happening with the information interactivity
Right.
behind this visual interface? And how do we build that into our systems so that as we get to the point that we're constructing application interfaces through these generative models, it's also carrying the intent of how someone should interact with information, what constraints should be there, how do we
Mhm.
handle error states
Right.
and riskful states. Um, and then, yeah, I think designers are going to also become more technical. I hope so. As our technical tools and languages become more accessible,
Yeah.
it's easier for designers. Yeah, right. It's sort of like we're in this mushy Venn diagram where now I'm not relying on some engineer to go build some things so that they bring back and I go, yes, this is what I wanted. You cannot design for generative AI until you have had someone use it, and not just one person, but multiple people, and look at those edge
Mm.
cases and look at that. And I think we're going to just see like the double diamond just go out the back door finally. For me, good riddance. But like it has to become organic. We're moving to a world of organic. We're moving to that world of communication. We have to be so clear up front. What are we making bets on? What is the intent? What are we thinking? No more just like PRDs that live in Notion that are 8 pages long. That PRD should be a token. The PRD contains the tokens of intent that pass through the components that contained the tokens of interactivity that reflect that intent, that
Mm-hmm.
pass into the actual generative model. What model do we select? What parameters do we put in place? What's the personality of this model that interprets and delivers that intent? But it's a single through line.
Mm.
And I don't, that will look different for different companies of different sizes. But I hope and I think that that's the future we're moving towards.
There's a there's a leader. I can't call her out specifically just because she's got a particular role in a particular company that would might be sensitive, but she believes that there's a design system out there that is component free. It's
Mhm.
entirely based on the foundations of tokens. And I actually heard that from somebody yesterday as well that I was talking to.
I wanted to weigh in on that perspective because it anchors this metaphor that I've always used when it comes to AI. If you think of what the calculator did for doing math, it didn't make people do less math. It made them do more complex and more complicated math. And I think AI for designers, as you said, is going to afford that. Rather than designing the buttons and the components, no, you're going to think and design more complex systems, and the output will still give you the buttons and the tokens as a part of it. But as a designer, you're no longer focused on just this one little element, but you're thinking in bigger context and solving bigger problems. And I think
Mm.
that's exciting as a designer evolving into taking on these more challenging tasks should be pretty exciting for them.
Emily, last week we interviewed a filmmaker who you can imagine is really kind of having his his entire life being rediscovered through the lens of AI. And he was able to point out that AI is helping them make the production process really, like the pre and post production process, really much more efficient than it ever was before. But the thing that AI cannot do is tell stories in a way that feels human. And so the emergence of the documentary as a medium, as a storytelling vehicle, is erupting, and it's becoming this exciting thing that we're probably going to see a lot more of. I imagine there's a kind of a thin thread to design in that, is that could we see a future where our products, our devices have more humanity in them, more storytelling in them, and that's going to require a lot more humanity than we've ever had before, and maybe, just maybe, that'll bring us closer.
There's at the risk of opening up a whole nother area that we probably don't have time to go into. Um, so
You
I
can come
live.
back. We'll have you back.
I live in the southwest of the United States, where there are deep cultural communities of indigenous people still very active and very present. And I've in my personal life had a chance to learn more about these cultures, as well as anybody can from the outside who isn't a member of the people that represent the culture. But something that stands out is the ways that indigenous communities of all types in all places treat culture as a living entity, where the
Mm.
individual is not the most important thing. The culture is learning. There's a long time perspective. And so people are born and people die and people move and people get married. And all it does is change the culture. And as a result, culture has knowledge. In the Hopi tradition, for example, there's not a lot of written tradition. It's passed down through storytelling because the
Mhm.
culture is the container of knowledge. The culture is the algorithm. If somebody is behaving in a way that is antithetical to the cultural systems, the culture will repress that or deny that behavior. We don't rely on individuals to police other individuals. I think there's a really interesting thing here. And for those of us who have grown up in sort of a traditional Western mindset, it's fairly foreign to us. But I think there's an opportunity for us to also learn through the parallels of other communities
Yeah.
and how they treat information systems because we are more connected. We are more connected than we have ever been. We're connected to each other's pain. We're connected to each other's truths. We're connected to each other's lies.
Oh.
We're connected to each other's joy. How do we work within that? Our myths, our storytelling needs to evolve. And I'm going into a very sort of meta space here, but I do think we have to reach for that. I don't think
Mm.
we can assume that everything in our society that's gotten us here is going to give us the answers on how to move forward. We have to be comfortable with change. We have to be comfortable with what happens when you push 8 billion people into a single room. You know, things get messy. And reach for those core principles and that humanity, and reach for the storytellers and the people who say, let's come through this together. We're in this together. How do we collectively make sense of this so that we can find a path out? So I think, it's hard to, what does that mean in design? Well, designers have the ability to tell stories through pictures. We have the ability to take a concept and put it into some form that
Yeah.
somebody can form an emotional connection to, good or bad. We have the ability to show the future and let people decide if it's a future they want.
I'm going to make a suggestion and I'd love for you to react to it because I think what you just suggested is fascinating. So, I think on one hand, we think of design in terms of designing the tools that we use to interact with AI. But on the other hand, you can also think of designing AI itself. And
Mm.
we have to be deliberate because if you think of it, Claude is designed in a completely different way than a ChatGPT. And so, as a society, I think we have to now become conscious that we're creating a new form of intelligence and we have to be deliberate in terms of how we design that intelligence. And as a collective, all our experiences get filtered up into this intelligence, and we have to be thoughtful about what experiences we want to frame in a certain context and how we want to present it. But fascinating. As you said,
Yeah.
I think that can be a completely different conversation. I love that.
Yeah.
Sounds
Well,
like the echoes of Conway's Law there.
oh gosh, yes. Well, Richard, I have espoused that. Like, it's so simple. Of course, the reflection of how we do things reflects in what we do. And I think kind of landing a point there so we don't go too far into the weeds, or I don't take us too far into the weeds. In this double diamond structured design way of working, we end up having these silly debates like, oh, should designers code? And, is everyone a designer? And I just think we're at a point where that's such navel gazing right now,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we are moving out of this world where design happens and then engineering happens and then something else happens. Every single person, to your point, Chris, every single person touching the tokens, the
Mhm.
constraints, the intent that this model is reflecting back to the users is leaving their fingerprints on that
Yep.
experience. And we can debate what is design, if design is intentional, but I think, to your point, we need to make sure that we are all recognizing the ways that our decisions can impact whatever is downstream, and just the choice of what model to build on
Mhm.
Mhm.
and what the parameters of that model are
Yep.
have massive impacts in what
Right.
happens downstream to the person interacting with. Are we thinking about that? And more importantly, as designers, are we putting ourselves in the situation and building the relationships and building the trust that give us the right to weigh in on those discussions and ultimately shape that experience downstream?
Absolutely. I mean, we definitely, if I walk into a room of AI designers, I'm not so sure I'm going to see too many poets and artists and filmmakers in there. And those are the very people we need if we're going
Yes.
to enter into a universe that isn't just defined by, some tech bros. We really do need a position to take that is almost romantic in a way, like,
Mm,
that
Yeah.
reflects on the beauty around us.
I
Emily,
love
this
that.
has been wonderful. You have to come back. We'll give you a couple of months to kind of breathe and gather yourself and do whatever you need to do. And as you can tell by my mustache and hairstyle, this is also honor of our another project that you've been working on, which is to dig into your grandfather's past as a pilot.
Yes.
My grandfather was also an RAF pilot, so yeah, this I've been obsessed
Wow.
with the Masters of the Air series on TV.
Yeah,
Really, really
Yeah.
wonderful.
yeah, that's great.
How
That's
cool.
why that's why we need more storytellers, more poets, more artists, because
I
these are
agree.
the things that bind us to the cultures that we hold so dear.
Emily, before you go, for listeners, for viewers, where can they find you? What's the best way to get in touch and to follow and
Mm.
keep in touch with your work?
So I am very active on LinkedIn now, and I am, I think, Emmy Campbell. But if you search AI Emily Campbell, at this point, thankfully, you can kind of find me on there. EmilyCampbell.co is my personal website, and uh, shape of .ai right now is the website, though I did just get the .com, so
Oh,
I'm
very
very
nice.
excited about that.
Very cool.
But I just would say, I hope it comes across that I am a very curious and just sort of open-minded, open to learning person. And I'm assuming, even though I'm putting my thoughts out there, it doesn't assume that I have the right thoughts or all the thoughts, or that my thoughts shouldn't be challenged. And I'm loving the number of conversations I'm having with people also in this space, curious about the space. And if someone hears this and wants to talk, I'm open always to following up for conversation.
And if anybody wants to hire you, you're open to work as well. Is that true?
I am looking for the perfect position. I am, yes.
Or maybe you might have to make one.
Yeah, I know that's the problem. No, just on that note, I think a lot of people right now are struggling to figure out, how do I define myself, especially those of
Right.
us who are tinkerers, who have touched many
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
But thankfully, a lot of other companies are looking for those people. So I'm in a lot of interesting conversations on that front too.
And we
Awesome.
really look forward to having you back for another conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Emily.
much. Cheers.